hope this is working. Why don't we begin in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. God said, "Do not come here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for this place on which you are standing is holy ground. You shall rise up before the gray-headed and honor the aged. You shall revere your God. I am the Lord. You shall not curse the deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind. For you shall revere the Lord." Amen. In the name of the Father, Son. So I took that from parts of Exodus, only because I like those parts where God starts off with, this is holy ground, then later, if this is holy ground, the world is, and you show a certain reverence to everybody in the world and everything in the world and to God. And I love, obviously, praying and studying the virtues. So the virtue I want to talk about tonight at first is actually reverence. And kind of how I pick the virtues is what I think we need as a community. And I really think we could do better on reverence. And somebody else had mentioned this, I want to reiterate this, that the East, like Taoism has this belief, and really so does Catholicism, that basic morality is following rules and regulations, but there's always a higher morality. And higher than rules and regulations is actually a morality based on just loving and making the virtues part of our life. And one person, just to be honest, just didn't understand that because morality is following rules. But we'd say no. If you're just following moral rules and regulations so that you can earn the title of good little boy, that's not really a very deep morality. Even like Hannah Arendt, if you remember the story, do you guys remember the story of Hannah Arendt? I'll pretend like you do. Hannah Arendt, this Jewish New York reporter, when they capture Eichmann, it's really amazing. They capture Eichmann. She's so fascinated by this that she goes for the Nuremberg trials and interviews, and like when Eichmann comes out, she expects this monster, dressed in black with tattoos or something, and out comes this wimpy little button-down former vacuum cleaner salesman. And actually, Eichmann, he was very good at obeying rules. Never got a speeding ticket, never cussed, followed rules and regulations. But his morality was, hey, it was legal to kill Jews, and I was just very good at it. That's just morality based on rules. It's not really a very deep morality. So even Hannah Arendt writes this thing about the, now I forget it. Oh, do you remember what that's called? She had a phrase that is just amazing. This type of morality, I forget the phrase, but like you could be a very well-behaved person and become a complete sociopath. Higher than rules and regulations is falling in love with virtues, where they simply the virtues that become who you are. And I want to talk about reverence, because reverence is a virtue, but also a type of morality. And do you know who Joe Rogan is, the comedian? Three of us, four, supposedly. So he's a comedian. He used to be a martial arts expert, and has kind of a terrible, terrible childhood, his story. But he happens to wander into this martial arts studio, and just happens to be a great one, by luck of the draw. And so he gets involved heavily in martial arts. And his teachers, he said, they taught him that before you'd go on the mat, you would bow to the mat, and then when you get off, you bow again. And what his teachers were teaching him a way of life. And so at 17, his girlfriend meets him at the gym, and nobody's there, and she wants to make out. And He says, no. He says, this place to me is sacred. It got me out of a terrible childhood. And he said, this place to me is like church. It changed my life. And now, what I find interesting about that interview is that Joe Rogan is not religious, but he knew something about that man demanded reverence because it changed his life. And in the interview, he was just saying she couldn't get, why can't we make out here versus over there? But like, where was the first time you really were learned reverence? Where some place or thing or person taught you the profundity of life. For him, oddly enough, it was a martial arts gym, or his teachers more specifically. But where's the first place that you really discovered reverence? For me, it's so pedantic, but for me it really is church. That's where it just flooded me. But when's the first time you discovered it? And like a lot of people, you want to practice it in every area of your life. And so this sounds kind of strange. For me, like, do you remember the movie Rudy? Okay, Rudy. I cried like a little girl. At the end, I was sobbing, Rudy. But what's that? Now he's the colonel.
He's selling Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Is he really?
Oh yeah, they dressed him up.
Wow, I didn't know that.
No, I'm just.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'm disillusioned. Tom, don't want to say this, but you're driving me to drink. There you go. And this sounds kind of strange. 9/11, I remember 9/11 teared me up. I remember when I saw that picture and I thought, God, I wish that could have been me. The story of Michael Judd, when it was in the Time, I think, where this priest, when 9/11 was happening, he ran to because he figured people would need anointing. So he runs into the danger. It collapses on him, and the firefighters, they drug out his body. I don't know if you saw that picture, where they're holding his body and they don't know where to put it, and they know he's a priest. And there's a church right across from the World Trade Centers. So they took him into the church and they simply laid him on the altar. And when I saw that picture, I was like, oh God, I hope my life ends that nobly. And once again, I cried. And my only point being is that times of sacrifice or triumph or profundity, what can you do but cry? And I don't cry at sad things. Sad things don't really make me cry, but profundity does. I don't know why. Now I even cry at the Budweiser commercial with the dog and the horse. But to me, there's just something that touches my soul. And we'd say, well, in a way, that's reverence. Reverence is a certain attentiveness to what's really important. And if we practice reverence, I mean, obviously, in the Bible, you show God reverence, but then it trickles down to, as it says here, the gray-headed and the blind and the poor. You start to show reverence for everybody. And yes, it's a gift of the Holy Spirit, but like I remember this parishioner who I thought this was a funny conversation. Don't remember her, but I remember the conversation where she went to this, I think it was a Camaldamese monastery, and she goes to interview these monks, except they're all hermit monks. They live in a monastery, but it's not one building, it's all little separate buildings. And she was surprised because when she was talking to them at the social, they usually keep a vow of silence. She thought that they'd all be introverts. So I said, no, they were introverts. You can't become a hermit without being an introvert. But introvert doesn't mean you're antisocial or that you're shy. That's not what the word introvert means. They're introverts. But yeah, they would take a vow of silence. And she said, when they were talking to you, you just felt connected to them, this connection, and they're joyful. And I said, well, just because they're hermits doesn't mean they can't show reverence to you. Maybe what you're just feeling in this communion is a certain type of connection we would call reverence or piety. It's a type of love about paying attention to what's important. Reverence is paying respect, treating people, places, cemeteries, churches, ceremonies with values. So reverence, piety, really kind of the same word. Piety is the Latin for the word dutiful. That's essentially what it means. But you're just paying attention to what, out of love, of what's really important around you. And why I say we need it is, I hate to be negative, but we're an overstimulated society. And they've done tests on kids for the last 30 years, and kids today have the lowest attention span because they're overstimulated. And if our attention is constantly getting hijacked, then our emotions are getting hijacked as well, and our attention. And we really can't practice reverence. So, I just think reverence is really important. And part of our culture, I think, even when you hear the word piety, that somebody's very pious, now it has a negative connotation. Pious, in a lot of people's mind, actually means hypocrite. That's why I prefer the word reverent. But the opposite of reverence, in my opinion, is a type of immaturity. Because if you've ever met somebody who's, who really lacks any reverence, there's a profound immaturity there. And I appreciate people who are playful. Really holy people I met are always very playful, but they're not immature. And reverence is, or at least the opposite of reverence, is a type of immaturity. I've seen kind of priests and other people that hide their insecurity by trying to be, Mr. Popular or whatever. It's not really reverent to the people they're serving. And the Greeks believed that without reverence, a leader becomes a tyrant. The difference between a leader and a tyrant in the Greek philosophy is one shows reverence. And even the Greeks believed that reverence was a sign of immaturity. And the lack of respect for authority, in their thought, I agree, is also a sign of lack of reverence. And the Greeks believed a lack of reverence leads to arrogance, and arrogance always leads to defeat. So in our society, I just think we need it more and more. So reverence is a type of morality. Now, oddly enough, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, New Testament, reverence is a virtue. In Eastern religion, Confucianism and Taoism, reverence also is a virtue and a morality, a higher morality. So I want to talk about that a little bit, but it's in the West, it's in the Bible. God demands it. Or St. Ignatius says, reverence for life led him to service. And reverence for other people leads to acts of love. So he said his relationship with the world was this deep reverence, because God, the love of God, can be found everywhere. Ignatius believed everybody should be called to a higher duty. And so how do you teach reverence? That's kind of another problem. How do you teach reverence? Well, I just think it's interesting. In the East and the West, one way is showing reverence to your parents, showing reverence to your ancestors. That's common in both, which I think is kind of interesting, that respect for parents and ancestors is how you teach the younger generation reverence. And why do you reverence your parents? For all their sacrifices. Now, granted, we impose it on children, but my belief is that until your kids are above 30, they're not going to really realize what their parents did. And just stories of my sister, she has to get up early in the morning, not anymore, we're grown, to take care of the babies and then go to work. And she says, I didn't realize how hard life was on her mother until I was a young mother. But my only point being is that kids won't know the sacrifice their parents made until much later, but we still teach them reverence. It gives meaning to our life. In the East, they believe reverence for ancestors and parents teaches you how a society is supposed to work. Reverence, we'll get into this, especially in Confucianism. Without reverence, you can't have good government. And so you start teaching children reverence for their parents and ancestors. Now, I just find it lacking because I have a lot of funerals. And I'm always surprised at how grandchildren show up to the grandparents' funeral. We had, and I don't mean to be judgmental, I'm just being critical. Critical is just like, really, it's not condemning people, just noticing good or bad trends. I'm very critical. So this Italian woman died. She was like a real Italian. Came over here, classy, beautiful, always dressed up for mass, sophisticated, just very classy woman. And we had her funeral, and one of the granddaughters was pallbearer, and the granddaughter, I swear to God, she showed up in running shorts, sneakers, and a wrinkled T-shirt. And she was the first pallbearer in. And like, I just am kind of amazed by that. So after the graveside, I hate to say this, my thought was, I got to get to know her just because it makes me curious. Why would you do that? Well, I was surprised. She's a very kind person, very sociable, very kind. Now, I didn't come out and say, what's up? Why you? But like, I was trying to figure out why would she do that? And really the point is that she was talking about her life, and I was really like, wow, she is a very kind person. But she's self-absorbed. She's going to do what makes her comfortable, and it was her grandmother's funeral, so she went for a run beforehand, and just that's how she prepared for the funeral. But that doesn't honor her grandmother. Or another one who, her grandmother died too, and it's more than one. This is kind of a consistent theme, and honest to God, it's like she was going to a nightclub. Like, she had 20,000 pairs of eyelashes on that, you know how that's really the thing these days? And honest, it was like a lycra dress that if she bent over, there you go. And these are at funerals. And I can't help but notice, there is a certain lack of reverence to the ancestors and parents. And no offense, I think it's a funny show, but look at The Simpsons. I like The Simpsons, but all the children in those cartoons and a lot of them, the humor is showing disrespect to the authority or parents. So I think we've kind of taught that. Now, Confucius believed in what's called filial piety. It's the virtue of showing respect for parents and ancestors. And in this conversation in this book between him and Zheng is, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, he goes his philosophy that a good society is based on the principle of filial piety. This idea that if people learn respect for each other, then you can have good government. I kind of believe the same thing. Not just more civility in government, that would be great, but the civility comes from something deeper, and that is just reverence to how you treat other human beings. So he would say, well, even Confucius says, it starts with showing reverence to your parents and how your conduct to them. Not just that you are taking, but how you're taking care. The same way you can, let's say if your parents are old, I think this is a great analogy. He said, you should feed your parents, and you could feed your parents, but you don't feed your parents the same way you feed a dog. Does that make any sense? You have to teach a society how to show respect and displays of courteousness. So anyhow, that's one. So this sounds kind of strange, but I wanted to mention this one. There's this Buddha story. So think about our movies. And movies are modern day pulpits. They're teaching us, or the generation, an ethic. Most of it's very disrespectful. But there's this Buddhist story in the East that I like, where this kid gets rewarded for death, or rewarded by death, for being patient and hardworking. So death grants him 3 wishes. And the first wish is that he'll see happiness in his father's eyes when his father looks upon him. Secondly, that he'll do ritual perfectly correct. And third, he would know what's on the other side of death. And the point of the parable is this. It shows the importance of piety, but the third wish about knowing on the other side of death is knowing piety and reverence. It actually teaches you something beyond just this life. I like that. I think our society's fairy tale is much different. It's out of humor, you show disrespect. The other way, typically it's mentioned learning respect, at least in the Bible, in the East and West, is actually ritual. Jews, the Bible is very particular on how you celebrate ritual because it shows respect to God and the community. In the East, ritual is very important. Religious ceremonies are the way that a society is trained to keep reverence. William James, a famous philosopher and psychologist, he believed the same thing. Made this statement about ceremony teaching people reverence. So you train your bodies physically with rituals to show reverence, and you train your intellect as well. So little rituals matter in a society. Not just religious rituals, but also all these courtesy rituals, like just raising a hand in class. It teaches a kid you're not the center of attention. You just can't blurt out. You have to take into consideration other people talking or the teacher talking. It teaches ritual. Now, in the East, Confucius mentioned brittle ritual, which I think is a great concept. And that's where you do everything very correct according to the rules, but it lacks any heart. That's getting back to how you do it matters, not just what you do. Feeding your parents shouldn't be the same way as feeding a dog. And the lack of reverence in religion can move people in the opposite direction, where, this is my belief, like when people go to Mass, there should be some sort of reverence. It shouldn't be like a rock and roll. And I've had arguments, actually, with several priests who believe, no, you got to make it fun or positive or people won't come back. Well, there's other ways to make things positive that's not like a pep club rally. And I made that mistake in my priesthood because at St. Mark's we had this program called Life Team, and it was fantastic. It was really fantastic. But the problem is that it was high energy. We got a lot of kids, that's true. But, you know, after kids left St. Mark's and would leave, either to college or some other parish, they would stop practicing because the Mass is not that high energy. So part of me was wondering, I wonder if I did the kids a disservice, that their idea of the Mass has got to be this high energy experience. Like this sounds kind of strange. I think priests make mistakes by not teaching reverence. This is my opinion. Now, I don't think it's that great of a show, so I'm not promoting it. But did anybody see the show Dairy Girls? Okay, I saw the first one, and the first one was really, really funny. And after that, it went downhill, and I don't watch it anymore. But Dairy Girls, did you see it? Oh, see, just the first one. That's all the ones that's worth. No, I know them. They would like it. It's these girls growing up in Derry, Ireland, during the Troubles, when, you know, there's all this war. The first one's funny after that goes down. And there's a point to this eventually. They're in this Catholic school, and I like it because the head nun, usually nuns, Hollywood likes to make them horrible. This nun is the only one who has her head screwed on straight, but she also has some great lines. So she has the best lines, and to be honest, she's my new spiritual animal. Because in the first one, the girls get in trouble, and the nun is trying to figure out which one did it, and one girl just gives up the rest immediately, and the nun says, "Well, now that we've lost respect for you." and another one, the girls want to get out of a test, so they fake seeing this apparition. And of course, the nun's not buying it, and the priest comes in, and the priest has really good hair, and the girls are just in love with his hair. So they say, "Well, where'd you get your hair?" "Well, I have it conditioned and blown out." And the priest does this, "I'm just like you. I know I'm a priest, but let me take off my collar." And he says, "I don't want you to call me Father. Call me Peter. I'm going to be your buddy." And the nun is there rolling her eyes. And this Irish mother is in the background. She's angry at the girls because the Irish mother also knows this is a lie. So the Irish mother says, "Is this guy normal?" And the nun says, "Well, he is a priest, so that should probably tell you right there." And the mother says, "They're lying." And the priest says, "Why would these girls lie?" And the nun is, "They're lying." But anyhow, the whole is kind of this spoof, really on the priest, that the priest wants to be their best friend and buddy. Took me a long time to get to that point, but is that really right for the priest to do? Like, no, I don't think a parent should be their kid's best friend until after 20. I don't think the priest's job is to be their best friend, but really to show them reverence. No, even the Catholic Church considers this important, but modern society is, "Oh no, we always got to be buddies." And the problem is, I'm getting into ceremony. Little ceremonies and rituals and in Eastern religion, in Judaism and Catholicism, how you behave is very, very important. It shows, yes, reverence, the importance of God and other people. And I have to say, wow, it's just not part of our culture. Even I told you about the wedding I had like 2 years ago. It was in the evening, and it was so beautiful. There's candles all down the center aisle. It was at night, and it was wedding by candlelight. And the bride, Amanda, she had a veil that she got from Ireland that, I'm not really into veils, but wow, she looked like $1 million. And the veil coming down the candlelight, it was just breathtaking. And so when she came out with the veil and the candlelight and it's coming behind, like both the groom and I said, wow, like it just was profoundly beautiful. And the groom's at the steps of the altar. She comes to the front pew, and all of a sudden, just before he's about to come forward, this photographer jumps out in between, and she bends over, and she wants to get pictures from, like, you just ruined this beautiful event. And she wants pictures. Not only did she ruin the event that way, she had no sense of ceremonial reverence, but she was wearing short shorts. And she was a little plump, a little fluffy. And like you could see her white underwear showing out. And then she had this backless kind of crop top that covered the front but was backless and back. And it was like, like, and it's just not the oddity, but think about this. She had no sense of ceremonial reverence. Like, people behave a certain way because it shows respect to God and the profundity of, like, two people making a commitment. I just think that sense of reverence is lacking. Now, I'm not hard on it because, like, you have altar kids, and you do the best you can. Like, Shaq is our altar server trainer. He's a former Marine, so he's very stickler, and I like it. But I like to be the one who, when they mess up, is generous, and I let Shaq be the, no, sharper corners. But it looks really good when they do it well. But were you at Mass on 5 o'clock this Saturday night? Did you see the one altar server? The shortest. It was a really, did you see it? Anybody else see it? Oh, I started to giggle, and I was like, don't giggle. Because I don't, but, so he's a littler guy, and it's a long, Shaq did the long gospel. And he starts to sway, and I'm like, oh my God, he's going to pass out. So he starts to sway. So then, and also, the candle was getting too heavy for him. So he's trying to find some way to like lean it against his body. It's not working, and then he's starting to sway. And Shaq always tells him, if you think you're going to pass out, just bend your knees. So he's holding the candle, and he starts to do knee bends. What's that? He did make it. I know, and later I said, I thought you were going to pass out. And he says, I thought I was going to pass out too. Now, stuff like that is endearing. But, hey, that's endearing because he's trying to be reverent and his body was just giving out. That's different than just saying, let's have a pep rally. Does that make any sense? I really like the Confucian ethics that if you want a well-ordered community, you teach children reverence. You teach them by respecting others, and ceremony teaches reverence. One more, and this is just so obvious, is that they found out that meditation actually doesn't increase reverence. Where not just reverence, but meditation increases compassion and empathy and frontal cortex thinking, but also reverence, how you treat other people. You become not only more joyful, but more respectful for other people. It's a strange thing, and like Hollywood likes to make this image that people who meditate regularly are like these zombies. Actually, no, people who meditate regularly are awake. The zombies are the people that aren't meditating. That meditation increases your reverence towards just life and other people and God. And Christ wants to remake the world with the Holy Spirit in us. So that's what I think prayer does. So, and this sounds strange. I know I'm weird, but I pray 49 Hail Marys per day. But for 49, and yes, 49 different virtues. But one of them that I pray a lot is reverence. And when I meditate on reverence, when I'm saying the Hail Mary, I always use the color green. And I know that sounds strange, but even the Bible, you're supposed to show reverence to creation itself. And did you see the movie Martian? The Martian? The guy that gets stuck in Mars? And then he comes back. I love the closing scene where he's sitting on a park bench and he looks down and there's a little tiny green plant growing between his feet. And it's almost humorous because if you're stuck on Mars where there's no green, just how precious a leaf is. In the billions of light years, there's only one little tiny green leaf found on this planet. Does that make any sense? Did anybody else have that feeling at the end? No? I didn't. But even reverence, so when I pray for reverence, it's always the color green for life. So that's my first virtue. So talk at your tables and discuss at your table. Where's the first place or first person or first situation, like Joe Rogan, that you learned reverence? So talk, and when we'll meet back together in 5 minutes. Talk among yourselves. Okay, so should we discuss, anybody want to say anything about reverence? You're also allowed to completely disagree with me. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
What did she say?
There would be excommunicated.
No, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I just feel like our society could use some more reverence.
I
So,
totally agree. Totally agree.
anybody want to share where they learned, or how they learned, or where? Okay, yes. I mean, I suppose somebody could send out on the invitation, please don't look like a slob.
Yeah.
But, or this is not a dating service at this time. Like, really the lycra dress was too much. But if you have to write that, doesn't that just show somehow the horses left the barn?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
that should have been taught
common
years.
sense, isn't it?
I don't think
I
it's.
mean, it should be.
It's common sense to you, but if you grew up in a world where you're taught, your self-esteem is most important and how you feel, and also there's just been this breakdown in the family. How many times do people today go over and have coffee with their grandparents and larger family? So I don't think you can really mandate that, is my only point. It has to be taught way before that.
Oh, I agree.
That is kind of funny because I.
You can do a restaurant and see how many men are wearing hats.
Well, you're wearing a hat right now.
He's not in a restaurant though.
Wine is being served. But that's interesting because I hate to say this, but I try and incorporate this rule because I am a high introvert. And I try and incorporate the 10-foot rule that if somebody's 10 feet away from me, try and make eye contact and say hello. Because I live inside my own head. But do you know how irritating it is, especially in the morning, where I'll say a good morning to 10 people and only one acknowledge my presence? That's typical. What's that? No, this is at the gym. But so when you come up the stairs, if you're working out, you don't. But as you're coming up the stairs, you always meet these people. And it's good morning. 1 out of 10 won't even look you in the eye and say good morning back. And I'm like, that's to me weird.
I think that's very weird.
And of course, it's younger people, but I just think it's weird that, just like you said, common courtesy. And I'm amazed because it really strikes me when you find people who do open the door. Because I've been to this one gym that I go to every morning. There's one guy, red beard, bald, but he's probably about 25. He does always hold doors for people. I'm like, oh, he's a good egg. I don't even know who he is, but that's a good egg. Yeah, Idaho is 100 times better than California. No offense. We really are. Except, here's the thing: we have to make sure we stay that way. That's actually why I came up with the 10-foot rule.
Comment on it when someone holds the door for me. I always make sure I say thank you, especially if it's a younger person. Really emphasize that I appreciate what they're doing and that it's the right thing to do.
It's just common courtesy. I mean, I always look.
It's only common if you're raised with it.
I know, but I always look to make sure I'm not letting the door.
Oh, close on somebody?
You know.
So can we switch to justice? We only have 15 minutes, but I want, and unless you want to talk more about reverence, I'm happy either way. Okay. So justice, I mentioned the story because I really like it. That there's this Jewish doctor from LA who her synagogue in LA did outreach, and she was going to the Congo, and she's treating this woman in this clinic in the Congo, and the woman asks, why are you doing this? And the Jewish doctor, she doesn't want to say because I'm Jewish, because that would make no sense to the woman who knows nothing about Judaism. So she said, and I like this answer, I belong to an ancient tribe that believes every human being is made in the image of God. And the woman understood that answer. So my point being is just in Judaism, Judaism is not concerned with orthodoxy, it's actually concerned with orthopraxy, how you act. Jesus is very much like that in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is very Jewish. It's how you treat other people. And my only point about that is that throughout the Bible, God really, really cares about justice. There's this not an opening story, but a story in the prophets where every morning God checks this vine, this grapevine, and God is looking for fruit. And the grapevine is religion, and the fruit is, it says mishpat. Mishpat is justice, is looking for all sorts of fruits on the vine. Justice and mercy and forgiveness and love. And at one point God says, I didn't find mishpat, justice. I found bloodshed. They kind of rhyme in Hebrew, not in English. But every time God looks in religion, he doesn't find compassion. My battery went out. Can I keep talking, or I'll change these while talking. But the odd part is about this. Sorry, this really has me. It's a complicated piece of technology. Oh, it's open. Okay. Apparently I can't do two things at once. At that time period where God demands justice, all other religions in that area, in the Near East, it worked the opposite, where the gods were associated with those on top of society and top of religion. The God of the Israelites is the opposite. He stands for the weak and the poor, and he judges kings and priests on if they bring forth justice. So what is justice? It's a little hard to define, but justice in Hebrew is mishpat. And it goes first out to the marginalized. So there is this constant repeated call in the Old Testament to care for the poor, the widow, and feed the hungry. I love this line where it says, you shall not turn away from your own blood. Well, if everybody's created in the image of God, we're all brothers and sisters. God will say in the Old Testament, you're obligated to speak up for the poor. Why the poor? Well, because the rich can hire somebody to speak for them. The poor only have you. And 1 out of 7 verses in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus talks about what you do with your money. And a big theme is you must care for the poor and the weak. The odd part is that Christ actually speaks very little about sex, sexual ethics. He does mention it a couple times, but overwhelmingly more about justice. And I just mentioned that because I'm always kind of amazed on Catholic radio. Most of the subjects deal with sex, but Christ speaks mostly about really justice. And it's just a question of seeing it. And I'll never forget I was in Central America where I was at this very nice parish where the priest says, where are these poor? Oh my God, they're literally everywhere. How could you not see them? But they don't want to see them. Justice is that you are taking care of the marginalized. Justice, mishpat, also means equity. That God mentions you should have the same law for the foreigner as well as the native born. That's equity, but that would be called mishpat. This is the first time any culture believed that nobody was above the law. The law applies equally to the foreigner, the native born, the king. Everybody gets treated the same. The Old Testament condemns those who offer even bribes. It condemns those who accept bribes. Why? The poor can't operate that way. We all supposed to operate the same way. That's mishpat. Mishpat can also be translated generosity. You have this obligation to care for the poor. Job, I like this. Job, in his defense, says, if I treated my wealth as my own, that would be a sin. So it makes this point that, yes, you have wealth, but you're obligated to care for the poor. Now, here's another thing about mishpat, and this sounds strange. Mishpat is also the machinery of how a society works. That a society should work a certain way, that there's this machinery of government that creates justice. And so what I mean is that you have the 10 Commandments, and after the 10 Commandments, you have hundreds and hundreds of laws on how a society is supposed to work. Now, we don't follow those rules, but the rules boil down to this. You have to create some way for the poor to escape poverty. So this gets a little strange, but mishpat, justice, is this. Sometimes you really have to give money to the poor, give bread to the poor. Other times, the society is also, always society is obligated to make sure there's a way the poor can escape poverty. So one little law like gleaning, not harvesting the corners of your field, and you're allowed to harvest the first time, but not a second. That goes to the poor. Now, what's interesting about that, in all these little rules, think about that, about gleaning, it's a way in which the poor can participate on their own way of getting out of poverty. Does that make sense? So the machinery, mishpat, is a way people can escape poverty, but it also demands that they participate. So if you're reading the Bible in English sometimes, when it says statutes and ordinances, actually that's mishpat. That could be translated justice, but they mean statute and ordinance of how a society works, so people can escape poverty. The problem I find is that people are confusing justice solely with machinery. And what I mean by that is this. There's a woman named Beatrice Webb, who in the 1890s, she was the main architect behind the British welfare system, and she wrote in her diary that when she was young, she believed every human person was essentially good and rational. And if we could just come up with the right technology and the right science and the right government policies, then poverty and corruption would be eliminated. Later in the 1920s, when she's an older woman, she realized she put her faith in government and technology. And the problem is that human beings are broken. We like to think that we're rational, but we're really not. And she said what we first have to teach people is to want justice and to hate corruption. No amount of machinery would fix the human soul. That to have lasting justice, we have to both change everybody's hearts, change our hearts, change other people's hearts, and also at the same time change the machinery. And does that make any sense? So the machinery is important. Think about slavery or the civil rights. Without governmental policy, you can't say, well, we'll wait till every human heart wants justice. Then slavery will end. No, you have to work with the machinery in changing society. But Beatrice makes the point that if she made the mistake of thinking it's all about the machinery, you also simultaneously have to work on people's hearts. Not that everybody has to be perfect, you just have to really cause people to desire justice. To me, that's a great definition of justice because it's both machinery and what's inside the heart, both this compassion and machinery. Lastly, sometimes in the Bible, the word justice is translated as judgment. Justice and judgment are kind of the same thing. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but the idea is this. Think about like the Gospel of Matthew, very Jewish. When you die, Christ will say, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, won't care what you have to say. Justice, if you've acted your entire life in justice, trying to promote justice, care for other people, then judgment you'll look forward to. Does that make sense? So justice is often kind of also translated justice. Judgment and justice. You can switch the two ones around. The problem I have is that in modern society, I think we place too much emphasis on just machinery. And to me, that's the Star Trek fallacy. Anybody watch Star Trek? Anybody love Jesus? Like in Star Trek, The New Generation, in it they said that they've eliminated poverty because they have the right policies and technology. A lot of people believe that still, that if we could just have the right, education and technology and right government, we could eliminate poverty. But you have to change the human heart. And the problem is, from even Beatrice Webb, you could actually enact the right laws that care for the poor, but the problem is people are broken. Not everybody's rational, where they'll take advantage of it, or the people running the machinery, they really won't care about justice, and even if you have the right policies, therefore the machinery won't work. And you're saying, well, what does that mean? Give you an example. At the gym, I go to the gym, right? And there's a guy who drives a sports car who has a membership at the gym and every other gym. And you know what he does? And he's basically a bodybuilder, goes on the treadmill he works out for like 2 hours, and he's disabled. And you have to kind of think, you're stealing. Or when I was in California, there was this guy who is disabled. I have no idea what his disability was, but it's this whole game that they play in California where he's disabled and gets money. He drives a sports car and has a BMW. He and his girlfriend, she's paid by the state to take care of him. Now, a bureaucrat is just pushing the paperwork through. Doesn't really care that really he's stealing from all of us and that he's ruining his own life. It's injustice to him. Does that make any sense? If you can have the right machinery, but even if the people operating the machinery don't care for justice, you have the Star Trek fallacy that would not change. You have to change the human heart. So I could go over that more, in fact, I think I will, because I'm going to, this is a major, major theme in the the entire Bible, where actually the story of Cain and Abel, it starts with justice, where Cain's blood cries out. And the word, I love this, in Hebrew is sa'ak. And God says, his blood cried out to me. Sa'ak, I heard his sa'ak. Sa'ak would be cry, but it means like cry of the poor, it's somebody in pain. And God says, I always hear people sa'ak. Or religion. How does religion start but with justice? Abraham and Sarah, they see these 3 strangers, and they run out and care for these 3 strangers. That is actually the first time in the Bible the word mishpat is used. It's used in relation to monotheism, that you have this idea of meal and justice and obeying God, all kind of in one story. Does that make sense? That's when the idea is religion is supposed to bring forth mishpat, justice. In the Exodus story, they're slaves in Egypt, and God says, I heard your sa'ak. I heard your cry of pain. And then when he frees them, he says, when you were slaves, I heard your sa'ak. So now you must hear the sa'ak of others, the cry of others. Or when you cry out to me, I will not answer. If you don't do justice for other people, don't expect justice from me. The prophets, the time the word justice, mishpat, is used the most is actually all through the prophets. If a nation stops practicing justice, what they get is the prophets. So, sorry, just trying to finish up an hour. That was really quick about justice, but I think, in the United States, because I think we have the Star Trek fallacy. You have to have this desire for justice. And the problem is, I know it's vague, because I'll give you an example of what I mean by vague. I want to care for the poor, That's a major thing. I think that is an absolute must. But like, for the last 2 weekends, we had a woman with her child come with a sign for rent, asking money for rent and food. And she's been here 2 weekends. In 2 weekends, I told her no. She came for the parish picnic, and she has her little girl, and she has a sign that she needs food and rent. So I said, oh, we got a lot of food here. Please eat. And she says, I don't want your food. I need money. And I said, well, we have a St. Vincent de Paul, a whole building, and people donated over there. They can take care of that on Monday. You have to come on Monday, not at 11 o'clock on Sunday. And she says, well, I was told, she says, I can't go to St. Vincent. I need the money now. And I said, yeah, but we have St. Vincent's just to make sure that, it's not a scam. And she said, well, somebody said that if I came here, you'd give me money. And I said, nobody said that. Nobody said that, because my philosophy is make change, don't give it. I know that's harsh, but I have given away, thousands of dollars, because I used to think if anybody asked, you had to give it to them, because I would hate to find out that person was Jesus. Well, to be honest, I still do give money away, if I think it's a true case. I've done that a lot. I know it sounds strange, I just sometimes believe it, but I have a problem with bring your daughter, which I think is child abuse, when you know the mass schedule, but you refuse to go to St. Vincent's. Does that make any sense? So, I have this great urge for justice, but I don't mind giving money away, and if I'm scammed, that's fine. But if you want me to believe your lie, and I know it's a lie, I just think that creates more injustice. So mishpat, it's a little hard to really nail down. You just have to have the desire for it. But I also like how there's boundaries in the Bible as well. So opinions, objections.
Yeah, I met that lady. And
Last weekend?
Yes, and I brought it over here. But when I did that, and I said, oh my God, maybe that was Jesus that was talking to me. And I said, Lord, please forgive me. And I walked away from her.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I want to be careful.
How do you spell mishpat?
MISPAT. I think that's it. Oh, there's an H somewhere.
Stand on your
Oh, okay.
Careful.
Makes me taller, Tom. I was trying to look tall.
So you're not saying mitzvah?
No, not mitzvah. Mitzvah is a purification. Mitzvah is a purification, right? Does that make sense? Anybody want to disagree with me? I'm happy. I could be wrong. I have been in other times in my life. And it's not that, but also when I was going to Santa Clara, that's when I learned this too. A lot of teenagers like to go into the city and panhandle and put on this. It's kind of fun to panhandle and pretend like you're a street person, but they're suburban kids who are quite wealthy. They do it as this odd sort of, they had an article on that, and I was like, oh.
It's hard to tell which is the real one,
So that's why, I know, I can't tell who's real and not. That's why I say make change, don't give it. Give regularly to St. Vincent's. But I just think, also, and yeah, so. I don't think there's anything wrong with the poor finding some way to need money. My problem is that the real poor then aren't being taken care of. What about the grandmother who the tree fell on when they went camping in McCall? Happened about 3 years ago here. She's in a wheelchair, goes to Mass. They had no money. So to be honest, the parish had to kind of pitch in to pay for a wheelchair. You kind of think, oh my God, the government should pay, help if, but no, the government offered no help. So we got the wheelchair and stuff like that. But my God, she's a grandmother who was simply camping and worked all her life, and now she's in a wheelchair. That's who it should be helping. We had another woman who's 65 who was living in her car because she couldn't afford rent. After a lifetime of work, yeah, we should, as a society, help them, not the bodybuilder. So that's, like, mishpat is a hard thing to kind of nail down. But
Don't you think that's the value of like the GoFundMe's, where it's kind of like a vetted thing, you know?
But
People
a
know
lot
the
of,
person
I
who
don't
needs
think
help.
GoFundMe is vetted though. Look at the guy about the scam. Do you remember the scam where they said a GoFundMe because this guy, my wife's car was broken down and this homeless vet helped her. Please let's raise money for the homeless vet. The whole thing was a scam.
Most of the people that I know say, I know this person,
Oh.
they give you the story, and if you know the person, you trust them, then you feel safe giving to the GoFundMe to help someone get a wheelchair or
Oh.
pay for
That sounds good,
surgery
but-
or whatever.
Didn't you guys see that in the news about the fake GoFundMe? So like, if you know the
There's always
person,
a way to scam the system.
There was a lady,
There is.
that said she had cancer, she got thousands of dollars.
oh, that's her right there. No, it's not. No. Lying. So that concludes I like talking about virtues. It changes up the adult ed. Next week, Deacon Ed, I forget what he's going to be doing something, and then we're going to do it'll be several weeks. We're going to do the books of Jonah and Ruth. And I know that sounds strange, but I really love the books of Jonah and Ruth. They're kind of making the same point from two opposite directions. So, what's that?
I just read the book of Ruth the other day. It's really short.
Yeah, I need small books. All right, God bless you. See you later.